For Pacifica Radio, July the 18th, 2024. I'm Scott Horton. This is Antiwar Radio. All right, y'all, welcome to the show. It is Antiwar Radio. I'm your host, Scott Horton. I'm the editorial director of Antiwar.com and author of the book Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. You can find my full interview archive, more than 6,000 of them now going back to 2003, at scotthorton.org and at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show and all your podcatchers and video sites and so forth, /Scott Horton Show. And, of course, I'm here every Thursday from 2:30 to 3 on KPFK 90.7 FM in L.A. And our guest today is Dave DeCamp. He's our news editor at Antiwar.com, and he's the host of a podcast called Antiwar News, which is not to be confused with Antiwar Radio, even though he's a regular guest on this show. And now he's doing interviews himself, too. Welcome to the show, Dave. How are you doing?
I'm good, Scott. Thanks for having me.
So you're doing interviews on Antiwar News now, huh?
Yeah, I did my first one with a guy named Khalil Sayegh. He's a Palestinian from Gaza. He's a Christian, and he came on to kind of talk about the plight of the Christians in Gaza and his family. Unfortunately, he's lost some family in this thing, and they've been sheltering at the Catholic Church in Gaza City. And we talked about a lot of that stuff. I think people would... I think it's a way we could really break through to more conservative Americans is to show how the Israelis treat the Palestinian Christians. So that was my first one. You could go watch it on YouTube, or if you listen to the podcast, you could go back a few episodes. The plan is to kind of do it kind of randomly. It's not going to so much be a regular thing, but when I feel inspired to interview someone, I'll just post it up there.
That's great. And the show itself usually is just a rundown of the top headlines on antiwar.com. Great with your breakfast sort of a thing. So that'll be interesting. I can't wait to take a look at that. In fact, you want to talk a little bit about that and what you learned?
Yeah, well, I've been following the situation with the Christians. We saw in October 2023, they bombed the St. Porphyrius Orthodox Church, a building attached to the church. I believe the number, they killed 18 Palestinian civilians, mostly Christians. There was Muslims sheltering there as well. And that was actually, people remember, Justin Amash lost relatives in that bombing. One of his cousins, a very young child. And then later, a few months later, the Catholic Church was basically under siege, and snipers killed 2 Catholic Palestinian women. And they shot and wounded 7 people who went out to try to help them. It's a kind of a compound. They have the church, they have a nun covenant, and a few other buildings where people have been sheltering. And the Vatican, we kind of got into this, the politics of the Vatican responded very strongly. Pope Francis called it terrorism, and Khalil was saying he thinks that did make a difference of how they approach the Catholic Church, because this is an area in Gaza City now where they've ordered another evacuation. Because what they want to do, it's very clear, is that they want to just kind of conquer northern Gaza and get all the Palestinians out. And, they're really unhappy that they have these Catholics that they can't just bomb away, because there is a lot of attention on them.
Yeah, it's sad that that's what it takes, but, anything will help, I guess, if that kind of awareness of Christian lives in Gaza being at stake here helps at all, politically, with pressure to, or pressure on Israel, or pressure on the American government to pressure Israel, then every little bit on the margin matters a lot when you're talking about people being blown to pieces over there. It's a funny thing. I've seen people's eyes really light up with surprise and new wisdom and understanding when they're informed that there's such a thing as Palestinian Christians, of course, right? Mm-hmm. And then, oh, wait a minute, they're on the side getting bombed? Oh, I guess that makes sense. Huh. And then
one of the things
that it's a whole new world
inspired...
they're living in now that they thought about it for the very first time,
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that inspired me to interview Khalil was when Tucker Carlson, he interviewed a guy named Munther Isaac, who's a Christian pastor in Bethlehem. And the reaction to that, that I think, again, it's just a very powerful when it comes to just American Christian conservatives. A lot of them might say, huh? What? And, we got into this in the interview. There's something that I've heard from people I know that have gone on tours of, Jerusalem, of the Holy Land. They say, oh, we were supposed to go to Bethlehem, but then they canceled it. They said, oh, the Muslims were acting up or something. But that's not why they don't want to take you there. They don't want to take you there because they don't want you to see the checkpoints and the way that these Christian Palestinians in the birthplace of Jesus are treated. So and he lived in the West Bank as well, and he's been attacked by settlers and humiliated at checkpoints. So it's a really kind of powerful account from him.
All right. Well, yeah, it's Anti-War Radio. I'm Scott Horton talking with Dave DeCamp, news editor at Antiwar.com. And so help us catch up on the bad news. I guess let's start with the politics of the Gaza war, particularly in D.C., but I guess especially focusing on our modern day peace process, the never ending talks towards some kind of ceasefire that never seem to go anywhere. Dave, what is the deal?
Yeah, so the story that we have on the top of antiwar.com today, Thursday, is that the Mossad chief, David Barnea, says that Netanyahu's one of his latest demands is what is impeding a deal with Hamas. And so this is significant because this is the Israeli official, very high-level Israeli official who's been tasked with leading these negotiations, and he's been, doing it this whole time. And now he's saying what is the one obstacle right now is demands from Netanyahu. And we've also seen members of Netanyahu's coalition government from the Shah's party, which is an ultra-Orthodox party, calling on Netanyahu to reach a deal with Hamas. Some Likud ministers, including the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, he said that the entire security establishment wants a deal. So it's increasingly Netanyahu and the most extremist elements of his government, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, who are standing in the way of an agreement here. And despite that, and I think this is related to the fact that there's much less attention on Gaza right now because of all the stuff happening in the U.S. with Biden's brain and this attempted assassination on Trump. We just don't see any the same pressure on Biden. The U.S. is still providing Israel, funding this genocidal slaughter, which has ramped up in recent days. They've really been bombing the place, even though it's just Netanyahu and these guys that Biden has actually mentioned by name, that Ben-Gvir is a problem. And it's them standing in the way of a ceasefire. And, the Mossad and the Israeli military, they don't want a ceasefire out of, the kindness of their hearts. They want one because they know the only way to get these hostages back is through a deal. And there's actually a report in Israeli media. I didn't see Netanyahu deny this, that in one of these meetings, war cabinet meetings, he said something like, the hostages, they're suffering, but they're not dying, essentially saying they're going to be all right. We don't need a deal right now. And what Netanyahu's doing, according to Israeli sources all over the media, they say he's holding off at least until his trip to D.C., which is next week. He's going to meet with Biden at the White House on July 22nd and then address Congress on July 24th. I think he's hoping to really kind of have a big public display of American support, hoping that it'll help him domestically in Israel. And then other sources say, he wants to hold out till Trump, if Trump's elected in November. But this is what is impeding the deal. And the reason why they want a ceasefire, they think it's the only way to get the hostages. And they are having to go into these areas that they completely destroy. Hamas is able to pop back up. I'm sure they're getting fresh recruits. You kill a teenager, a young kid's family, 20-something-year-old's family. What are they going to do, So it's just the military can't achieve this goal that Netanyahu has set. They've actually said, and I know we've talked about this a lot, but the military has come out and said that the goal is unachievable. And again, U.S. is still funding it 100%.
All right. So, listen, they just keep bombing these schools. I hope that people saw in the news, if the news covered it, I know The Guardian did. I saw it a couple times, footage of these kids playing soccer in a parking lot, and then the Israelis bombed them. And then, Dave, I read another one, and I think you had written this up as well at antiwar.com, based on an interview conducted by Amanda Weiss, reporter. By the way, if people got little kids in the car, cover their ears or change the channel for a second or something for this one. It's ugly as hell. A 16-year-old girl says she saw a little boy who had already had his legs blown off, screaming, crawling on just his hands. He'd been caught in a Israeli bombing there. And then they bombed him again and turned him to nothing right in front of her eyes. This is a level of cruelty that you just couldn't embellish. You know? Imagine some serial killer did that to a kid, blew his legs off with a bomb and then dropped another one on him too. The worst thing you could possibly think of. Put all the serial killers in your encyclopedia to shame. But this is what Israel does all day, every day, on America's dime, with American weapons, all wrapped in our flag, in our names, and putting us at risk for terrorist retribution for their crimes. It's sick. It's insane that this is going on.
Yeah, and this has been, again, you know, they've ramped things up over the past few weeks. It seems like every day now that they bomb these schools turned shelters, you know, whether they're UN run. They bombed a Catholic school recently. That's what kind of renewed my interest in that topic. The strike that you're talking about, that girl, what she was describing, that was the bombing of the Al-Mawasi camp, which is where Israel told Palestinians from Rafah and Khan Yunis to go. That was the so-called safe zone. And Israel claims that strike, they were targeting Mohammed Daif, who's the head of Hamas's military wing, and another commander of the Khan Yunis brigade. There's been no confirmation of that, even though Israel's admitted that they don't know if they killed Daif. And I mean, I know you know about Daif. He's always been, you know, a very shadowy figure. He never makes public appearances. It's been assumed for a long time, because Israel's tried to kill him many times, that he's been down in the tunnels. And in that strike, you know, on the refugee camp, because it's a tent camp surrounded by this structure that they bombed, they dropped, according to Israeli officials, they dropped 5 2,000-pound bombs on that camp and killed 90 people.
On tents?
Yeah. I mean, that story, that Mondo Weiss story, I included that quote in one of mine, and we ran it as well. I mean, reading that whole thing, I mean, it sounds like hell. It's just, again, it's kids describing this. And man, it's just, this is what they're doing. And, you know, Biden in an interview the other day, I guess we shouldn't even really, you know, considering how his condition is, he's trying to say he only gave the Israelis defensive weapons and that he stopped sending them heavy bombs. But they paused one 2,000-pound bomb shipment after sending them 14,000 of them. And they just released the other 500-pound bomb shipment that they paused as well. They just released that as this is happening. You know, it's, again, just like the attention's off. It doesn't matter. They're just going to give them whatever they want. It doesn't matter how many children they slaughter. Yeah.
Well, and this does go to his dementia, that he can say with a straight face he believes it, and so he's not worried about it. It's already taken care of. It's a fact that nobody's done more for the Palestinians than him. Might as well be insane. He's, you know, deteriorated enough that the things in his brain just couldn't be further from the truth, and he just believes in them like hell. You know, he goes on and on about all Trump's lies in the debate, and there were a few, but he lied a lot in that debate too. But all you can do is give him the benefit of the doubt that maybe half of that's just the senility talking and the other half is pure dishonesty. But I guess it's pretty easy to continue to arm a war when you don't even know you're arming it. Mm-hmm. When you think that giving them pallets full of bombs for dropping on people's heads is defensive weapons, like it's anti-aircraft missiles or something like that. And the guy's completely demented. He's out of his mind.
Yeah, and you know what? John Kirby, who is not in the same mental condition, a few months back, he said, name me another country that's done more for the Palestinians than the U.S. And, you know, I mean, the stuff that's come out of his mouth and during this whole thing. I mean, if there is, you know, a Gaza Holocaust museum in the future, they're going to have a whole section dedicated to John Kirby and Matt Miller and these government spokesmen just for 9 months now, they've just been lying and justifying, some of the worst atrocities we've seen in this century. And that's how they're going to be remembered, I think.
People say to me, Scott, how do you get so much work done all the time? Coffee. It helps keep me from falling asleep. And it tastes really good because I get it from Moondo's Artisan Coffee at moondosartisancoffee.com. Moondo's is kind of the anti-Starbucks in that their coffee tastes real good. They have lots of great choices, representing all kinds of regions, blends, and flavors. I'm drinking the Ethiopian presently. Hey, wait, also, do you like saving money on good-tasting coffee? Right now, you can get 10% off and help support this show if you just go to moondosartisancoffee.com/Horton. Find the link and the QR code in the margin at scotthorton.org. That's moondosartisancoffee.com/Horton. Hey guys, I had some wasps in my house, so I shot them to death with my trusty Bug Assault 3.0 model with the improved salt reservoir and bar safety. I don't have a deal with them, but the show does earn a kickback every time you get a Bug Assault or anything else you buy from Amazon.com by way of the link in the right-hand margin on the front page at scotthorton.org. So keep that in mind. And don't worry about the mess. Your wife will clean it up. Well, folks, sad to say, they lied us into war. All of them. World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq War I, Serbia, Afghanistan, Iraq War II, Libya, Syria, Yemen. All of them. But now you can get the ebook, All the War Lies, by me for free. Just sign up for the email list at the bottom of the page at scotthorton.org or go to scotthorton.org/subscribe. Get All the War Lies by me for free. And then you'll never have to believe them again. It's Antiwar Radio. I'm Scott Horton. I'm talking with Dave DeCamp from Antiwar.com. So tell me, what is this crap about an Iranian plot to touch Trump? Please.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I can't help but laugh. But so, I mean, as we discussed, the Ayatollah doesn't want war with the U.S. Well, first, I should just say what the actual report was. It came from CNN, and it cited a human source, which means a guy saying a thing. That's what they said the intelligence was based on. And they said that, the Iranians were plotting to assassinate Trump and that they increased Secret Service protection. And that's a whole nother can of worms is, the people, obviously the big response I saw from Republicans was, how can they say they increased Secret Service protection when they let this shooter get up on a nearby rooftop and right. Get out a shot on the president?
And you know what I should say, Dave, that as far as that goes, that's relevant. Like if you told me that the threshold for when the Secret Service takes a rumor seriously and told me that threshold is very low, I would be like, fine. If somebody makes up a stupid lie about Iran and Secret Service adds more cops to a former president's detail, I don't care. That's okay. But just don't try to tell me that it's real. Don't try to tell me the Secret Service really believes it either. I hope that they know more about how the world works than that.
Yeah. And then, so the Iran angle is basically they said, intelligence from a human source that they're plotting to assassinate him. And, they point this to the Trump ordering the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general who was in the head of the Quds force. But, as we discussed, the Ayatollah, Iran, they do not want a war with the U.S. That's very obvious, especially if you look back at the things that have happened for the past few months when things really heated up between Iran and Israel. Iran told the U.S. 72 hours before they launched those missiles and drones at Israel, which was the reprisal for the bombing of their consulate in Damascus. And the U.S. denied that Iran did that. But you had Jordan and Turkey confirm it. And if they told Jordan, they know that that's getting back to the U.S. So they really choreographed that. And then there was also the Shia militias, attacking the U.S. bases.
Go back to their direct retaliation for the hit on Soleimani. They fired at an empty corner of an American base. And some guys did get some headaches from that and some blast trauma, but they were, still. It was a symbolic strike and launched with warning and launched deliberately away from where Americans could be hurt because They're settling for symbolic retaliation, as you're saying here in this more recent case against Israel as well. That, come on, everybody, look at it from the point of view of the Ayatollah. What are you going to do with a problem like America? Not much, right? I mean, it comes down to it, they could give us a real headache in the war where our country completely destroys theirs. And it would be costly. But he doesn't want to get his country into a war with America's B-52s and B-2 bombers. Get real. That's why they have to resort to the silly lie that, well, yeah, but he's crazy. You know, he might be a theocrat and be an illegitimate leader, but that doesn't make him so irrational he's going to get his country destroyed, picking a fight with the USA. And everybody who says so is just lying. They always have been.
Yeah, so, you know, you take that into consideration. If Iran killed a former president and the front runner for the next election, you know, that's kind of a way to ensure, you know, military confrontation with the U.S.
Absolutely.
So
Joe Biden, look, if that was really true, that the Ayatollah put a hit out on Trump and killed him, Biden would go to war with Iran. He would. The whole national security state would go right to war against that because that's their turf. Even if they don't like him, still, that's crossing a line they would never tolerate. It would be full-scale bombing campaign.
And the report did also say there was no indication that this guy, what's his name, Thomas Matthew Crooks, I think, the 20-year-old shooter. It said there was no indication that he was linked to this alleged Iranian plot. So then the question there is, then why are you even putting this information out there? Because, of course, people are going to connect the dots. And that's exactly, I think, what they want them to do is to think, oh, it's a foreign threat, you know?
Like, that's really all you need to know, too, is the government themselves admitted to CNN that they only have one guy told them this. They have no signals intelligence that tells them this. They have no confirmation from any of their spies or any of their allied governments in the Middle East. They can't even say Mossad confirms it. Give me a break.
Mm-hmm. And
everyone should assume that came from an Iranian exile, right? Somebody who's like loyal to the Shah's family or loyal to the Mujahideen cult, communist terrorist cult.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, you know, they connect it again to the Soleimani assassination. And you do see once in a while, you know, IRGC officials threaten Trump and Pompeo. But I mean, it's just, you know, part of their kind of rhetoric. You know, they can't actually go out there and kill Trump, you know.
They would never dare.
Yeah.
They would never even consider that. That is completely ridiculous. And I hope people aren't afraid of that. You know what I mean? Don't let them manipulate you. When they're pointing at a foreign threat and their explanation for the foreign threat's behavior is that they're crazy, it's because they're lying. And the foreign threat is actually not doing what they're saying that they're doing.
Yeah, so Iran, you know, was also in the headlines because you had J.D. Vance in, like, you know, one of his, I think it might have been his first interview after the news that he was picked as the vice president, saying, you know, if you punch Iran, you got to punch them hard. And he called Biden's, you know, bombings, I think, you know, referring to Biden bombing the Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, called them weak little bombing runs. So that wasn't very encouraging to see because from Vance, who is good on Ukraine, and I know he's voted to take U.S. troops out of Syria and stuff like that. So, and he was referring to the Soleimani assassination, basically praising Trump for killing him.
Hey, did you see where someone leaked text messages where he was saying, if America had listened to Israel, we would have never attacked Iraq? Almost died laughing.
Yeah.
And I guess he was referring to Sharon saying, no, hit Tehran first. It's like, yeah, but Netanyahu and the neocons were after Iraq first, dummy. Come on. Mm-hmm. You can read that in the forward, dude. Catch up, Mr. Vice President. Elect almost.
Yeah, that's something I always point to when I cover these stories about Netanyahu coming for his big congressional address. Is this was when he wasn't prime minister at the time, but he gave, you know, testimony to Congress saying, you know, there's no question in my mind that Saddam is developing weapons of mass destruction, and it's going to be great if you invade. You know, there's going to be great. I think he used the word reverberations across the region. And yeah, I mean, that should give Americans a reason not to like the guy.
Yeah, that right there. And that Richard Pearl and Paul Wolfowitz and Scooter Libby and the whole neocon cabal, their term, was loyal to Netanyahu and his goals. It's all in the clean break that David Wormser and Richard Pearl wrote for Netanyahu in 96. We get rid of Saddam, everything goes our way, which of course was completely stupid and wrong, but they're stupid and wrong, the neocons. So that's what you get.
Mm-hmm.
Always love revisiting Israel's role in Iraq War II. And I'm glad that our future vice president gave us an opportunity to discuss that here. And I hope he's just showing off for the Israel lobby and calling off their dogs. Oh, I hate Iran. Okay, please don't shoot. Okay, good. So maybe he'll be okay. I don't know. I know that, in fact, I don't know if you saw this, Dave, but Ross Douthat in the New York Times was reassuring Michelle Goldberg that he's not a Pat Buchanan paleoconservative. He is a realist. And that means he wants to focus on China, not Russia. Blah, blah, blah. So, in other words, he's Henry Kissinger instead of Richard Pearl, but that's still pretty bad.
Yeah, and that's what he said. He did this interview in the New York Times last month, and he said, talking about Ukraine, and he outlined some pretty good stuff. He says, freeze the lines where they are. Let's work out a deal where Ukraine maintains its independence, but is also neutral, because he says he knows that that's the big thing for Russia. He also said that the U.S. would have to provide Ukraine with some kind of military assistance, but at least he's when he talks about Ukraine, he sounds serious about it, and he kind of has made it his thing since he came in the Senate. So it does give me, more hope that if Trump does win, there will be some kind of deal. And but also in that interview, he's talking about China. He said in that Hannity interview, he was talking about Ukraine. He said we got to wind down Ukraine because we need to focus on China, which is the biggest threat. He said we're sending all the damn weapons to Ukraine and not Taiwan. So it is unfortunate that is the logic. But, again, it's like, at least it's not Tom Cotton or somebody like that. Yeah.
Well, that's a whole other question. I know you have an article about, of course, the Hawks are pushing hard to bring Tom Cotton and Mike Pompeo, in the latter's case, back into the new Trump administration. That the Democrats have all but conceded is an inevitability at this point. And so we'll see. There's hopefully going to be a real fight in the Republican Party about whether they're going to let George W. Bush's guys control foreign policy again more, or whether we're really going to have some kind of break and an America First take, which, hey, it could have been Rubio, dude. So fist bump across the airwaves here, pal.
Yeah, it could have been a lot worse.
Seriously. All right. Before we go, real quick, talk to me about the tit for tat going on in Lebanon. I know that Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, has said that essentially Israel and the Palestinians are driving this car, and when their war stops, then their war will stop. But there's also a lot of rumors going around that Netanyahu really has sights on them next. And then I wonder, is that really true, and whether people really believe that that's coming next, or no way? Look at how much difficulty they're having right now in Gaza. But then I wonder whether there's any real rumors going around that he's counting on dragging Biden in. That, yeah, sure, Israel can take Hezbollah with the American Air Force's help. They can. What about that?
Yeah, so I haven't seen anything lately about that being Netanyahu's goal, like actually getting the U.S. to intervene directly. Although, and I know I mentioned this, I think the last time I was on your show, Harrison Mann, who resigned from the Pentagon's Defense Intelligence Agency, said that that's what he thought was going on. And he just resigned pretty recently. But it's tough to really say, what's going to happen with Lebanon, because we've still see these tit for tat strikes. Israel has been launching some very heavy airstrikes. It's over 400 people have been killed in southern Lebanon, about 100 civilians, and then a few dozen people in northern Israel have been killed by Hezbollah. And so these strikes continue, and we've seen this rhetoric. They still say this. Gallant, essentially, they say, if we have a ceasefire in Gaza, we're going to ramp things up in the north. And then you have Hezbollah saying, if there's a ceasefire in Gaza, then we're going to stop firing on Israel. And so one of the reasons why, according to reports I've read, one of the reasons why the Israeli generals want a ceasefire in Gaza is because they want to recuperate and prepare for a potential war or a limited incursion into southern Lebanon, which, again, even if they do take a break and try to rebuild, I mean, they're still going to be stretched pretty thin. So it's tough to really know, if there's anything to these threats. But the risk is there, of course, of this thing escalating into something big as long as they're firing rockets and launching airstrikes, across the border.
I guess there's a possibility that the Israelis have really been holding back, and that if it comes to war with Hezbollah, they have a whole new war plan that kicks in that's a much greater tempo of strikes against their much more capable enemies there. But I have to suspect that they're just hoping the U.S. Navy and U.S. Air Force come and rescue them.
And that's the signal the U.S. is sending. They sent another couple warships in response to the Lebanon tensions. So, they're basically giving them, their backing in this.
Great. All right. Long, hot summer. KPFK Radio. Thank you, Dave. Appreciate you, man.
Thanks, Scott.
All right, you guys. That's Dave DeCamp. He's news editor at Antiwar.com and also hosts Antiwar News, now including interviews. And I'm Scott Horton. This is Antiwar Radio. I'm here every Thursday from 2:30 to 3 on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA. See you next week.